Indeed, we have Agnieszka Typisbańska, HR lead and diversity advocate representing Rockwell Automation, joining us today. Hello, Agnieszka.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for having me today.
Agnieszka, it's probably fair to say that we're living in a world where diversity is under attack. It's probably not an exaggerated statement, but I understand you're a globally experienced diversity advocate. I understand you yourself had a moment of realization, epiphany, if you like to call it that way, when you understood how and why it should be considered a leadership priority. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Of course. So my passion for D&I started quite early. I've spent past 11 years in the financial industry where I worked
kindergarten. Not yet.
where I worked as an HR manager and primarily in campus recruiting. And that was the first moment when I realized that certain recruitment privileges favor certain groups, while other underrepresented face significant barriers. And later, when I moved to New York to take care about diversity and internal mobility, I had a pleasure to run a program that was helping individuals to come back to the industry after extensive career break. So helping individuals to reintegrate them into the workforce also involved a lot of work around equity and inclusion on a broader scale. And witnessing those initiatives and the transformative effects of those initiatives, both on individuals, but also organizations, made me to fully commit to my career in D&I. And in my current role, covering APAC and EMEA and working as a part of my role closely with leaders, I want to continue this effort to make sure that we all can build together and foster inclusion and build together inclusive culture.
So it felt like a bit of a call for justice in your case initially when you felt something needs to be done. Tell me, this segment of our conference is essentially about tools, tactics, practices. If you were to choose your top three, what would they be?
Many has been mentioned already yesterday and
hopefully after
today, yes. But what I would probably like to focus is active listening, bias interruption trainings, and inclusive decision-making framework. And I'll elaborate a little bit on those. We've heard a lot about communication, and probably apart from the feedback that many others mentioned and collating feedback from your team members, what I would like to leave managers and leaders who are hopefully listening to us today is to encourage them to tune into ERGs. And by ERGs, I mean those groups that support communities from underrepresented backgrounds, historically underrepresented, like women, ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, veterans, and so on and so forth. Because sometimes the ERGs also focus around similar interest. If you really listen to the stories of those people and join the events, not those social ones, not those where they celebrate, but rather when you join those open conversations, like bold conversations, courageous conversations, lunch and learns, when people really share their story, their struggles, to be the only one, to be the one representing non-dominant group, you change the perspective. So that's first thing. Second thing is interrupting your biases. And many organizations run bias interruption trainings. I've recently read an interesting article by HBR, Harvard Business Review, that questions actually the impact of these trainings. Why? Because the longer the gap between the training and the decisions that you are taking, the more likely your decision will be biased. So what needs to be remembered and where the focus needs to be is to actually remind yourself and do these trainings on an ongoing basis, continuously challenge yourself. It's not enough to do the training and consider yourself as aware of the biases. Jennifer mentioned yesterday that biases cannot be completely removed, they cannot be completely controlled, but you are likely to increase the possibility of their effects on your decisions. And the last thing is around framework for making inclusive decisions or inclusive decision-making process. So making sure that everyone is involved in the decision-making process. I probably should start also nurturing our audience with the fact that 50%, almost 50% of the inclusion comes from the manager. To be precise, research by Catalyst shows that 45% comes from managers, but only 5% of managers are actually inclusive leaders. So there is a lot of work to do. And finishing, I would like to leave our audience also with one model that is developed by Catalyst, which is about leaning inward and leading outward. And I won't go very much into the model, but it shows certain behaviors and experiences the leaders can demonstrate to become more inclusive. Those with leading inward are around curiosity, courage, or humility. Those that are referring to leaning outward refer to accountability, allyship, and courage.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Leadership styles are essentially in this conversation. And yet, yesterday when we talked about ERGs, you could get a sense from that conversation that interest, engagement from leadership is waning, that this connection, which was so powerfully established earlier, now is undergoing this early marathon tiredness phase, isn't it? So that needs to be addressed. Therefore, my next question would be, how do you ensure that those inclusive leadership values are actually reflected in leadership decisions, leadership behaviors?
Thank you so much for this question. So I can share what I do as a manager, as a leader, but also what I advise those with whom I partner and work with. First thing is to review and reflect on your actions and the impact, because intentions might be the best, but it's the impact that really matters and that really tells you about how much inclusive you are. Secondly, continuous learning and taking feedback into consideration. And I mentioned already about these employee resource groups. They're a perfect source of information, not only to learn about the experiences of others, but and they help you to change the perspective, but also they are perfect source of feedback for you. So do not hesitate to ask those individuals about the feedback. And the last thing that I would like to mention is to tie your actions to the data. Caroline highlighted yesterday the importance of data and measurement. As a manager, you should continuously look through the processes and the decisions that you are taking. By processes, I mean those that are related to people. So hiring, promoting, turnover, and when you review those decisions that you make as a manager regularly, you make adjustments and you define interventions which are needed.
What advice would you give to leaders at different stages of their journey towards increasingly inclusive approach?
Let me break down the audience for those who are just new to inclusive leadership and start, and those who are probably more advanced and more senior, because we have different managers and leaders. Those who start, probably I would advise to be authentic, to build psychological safety, which was mentioned today earlier. You need to share your personal. And when I do trainings at Rockwell Automation, we train all of the managers. It's called Managing Across Difference, that training that has different elements. I often advise managers, and I start with asking them, how comfortable do you are to share personal? So personal meaning, how comfortable do you share your sexual orientation at work? How comfortable do you feel sharing your faith? And it also varies between the cultures. Some might be, oh, hold on, this is private, this is personal, I don't want to share it. And that's fine, that's okay. We should be respectful. But if you really want to create this safe environment, psychologically safe environment, you need to start from yourself. What helps with that is another model that I will bring, since we are talking about the Playbook toolkits. Model developed in 1991 by Maren Lodden in her book, which is called Dimensions of Diversity, and shows how complex as individual we are. So if you look through all of the dimensions that shaped yourself, including organizational or era, like think about pandemic, how this shaped you, how it influenced who you are. And then you start reflecting, how much do I know about the team members, who they are? If you realize that you don't know so much, you have homework to do. Let's move to those managers who are more senior or perhaps more advanced with inclusive leadership. For them, the advice would be to definitely tie D&I into your business strategy. Diversity, equity, and inclusion needs to be in your strategic framework, reflected in your mission and values, because this can only result in a long-term sustainability of your efforts. And for everyone, regardless whether you're senior, more junior manager, new manager, balance courage and humility. Courage to be able to refocus when there is when the focus shifts away from diversity, equity, inclusion, and humility to be able to acknowledge your shortcomings, because we all make mistakes, and we will surely do. But what's the most important is to reflect, apologize if needed, do not justify in a moment, but move on.
Lastly, Agnieszka, give me one small yet impactful action that every inclusive, aspiring leader could start tomorrow.
I would get back to those ERGs. I really think that you can learn a lot from them. So champion and join ERGs in a space that allows you to. Whether you are a leader of the ERG or whether you are a sponsor or someone who is tuning into the initiatives, surely you'll become over time an ally and try to set the goal for yourself to become an ally. And true allyship means not supporting, not tolerating, not accepting. It's really an action that requires advocating, realizing your own privileges coming from the dominant group, and advocating for those who are underrepresented and who are the only ones.
Agnieszka, you started with the discussion around cognitive biases, saying that they cannot be entirely eliminated. So cognitive biases themselves are challenging enough. In a world where those are enhanced by personal preference, algorithms, whatever media we consume based on our outlook on reality, we should be aware that this technological reality is making it even more difficult to address our own cognitive biases, prejudice. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to have you with us, Agnieszka.
Thank you so much.